case you're wondering. Welcome back to the Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes. It's a Wednesday afternoon, and I'm delighted to have a full house today. We've got Patrick McGilp, Quinny, and also Chris McElwain. And first of all, Chris, double denim, thank you for covering the stream last night. Quinny, myself, and a few of the other Acsom team members were doing it live. We were at Bad last night. Quinny, how did you find that, mate?
That was great. I was saying to Chris as we came in there, it was a great venue. I've never been to the place before. I had a great time. And I must say, by the way, the pie was levels above standard. It was.
Did it live up? Was that a Champions League pie?
I'd say it was a gourmet pie. I would say it was proper pastry. It was nice and wafery. It wasn't like your standard microwave effort or anything. Great staff there. Great attendance as well. I was great chatting to everyone that showed up as well. And it was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'm glad that Quinny has, focused on the important things in life, Patrick. The quality of the pie. We will, of course, be talking about last night's game. I had an opportunity not only to watch it last night, but to review it this morning. And it's interesting, Patrick, because obviously the vast majority of the matches, I'm absolutely glued to them with a wee notepad. I know that sounds a bit sad, but it's just so that I have some talking points, discussion points for the Acsom Bulletin. But watching it without that is something I almost forgot about, the enjoyment of that. But not just that, right? I'm sitting next to Jackie McNamara, and he's talking me through the game. And I realise at that point, I know nothing about football. Nothing. He's pointing things out, Patrick, that's happening on the park. And, the root causes of certain issues. And I'm like, wow, this is talking about levels above pie standard. This is levels above football analysis, right? The standard was high. Patrick, how did you find the game last night, mate?
Frustrating, if I'm being honest, because they didn't look like a good side at all. They looked set up to frustrate us, and that obviously worked because we weren't anywhere near our best, in my opinion. Obviously, you're away from home in Europe, so there's all sorts of caveats here. Usually you just you lose by a good number of goals and then you pack up and go home. So to get any sort of result based on that history, based on that form, is actually quite good. And you feel a bit silly being disappointed with a draw because a draw away from home, it's a fantastic result, especially with the length in the grass on that pitch last night looked to be a bit of an issue. You've seen the passes were really slowing down.
Heavy.
It's obviously winter. They should be used to the cold weather, but you can't underestimate the effect that has on a game. And obviously, they've got 8 points now, Zagreb, and they're obviously quite decent defensively. They set up to frustrate us. But we had so much of the ball. I think we had about 65% possession, and I think up until McCowan has a shot from range just after coming on, and then Engels has that cutback in the 89th minute, which the defender does really well to intercept. And you thought that was the moment, but apart from that, I thought we struggled to create anything. Kuhn sort of got to the byline 2 or 3 times, but couldn't quite pick out a man. So it's a bit of a frustrating one. It does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity. I think Bruges to me felt that way as well. I just thought, we could have played better and got the full 3 points out of it. But, away from home in Europe, you absolutely take a point. And I think 10 points guarantees you the next stage. And obviously a win would do so as well. So get anything at home to Young Boys and you're absolutely sorted. So hard to have too many complaints, but it does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity, I've got to say.
I was watching the post-match words from Brendan Rodgers as well, Quinny, and there was that sense that, we're disappointed about a draw away from home in the Champions League. That actually shows a bit of progress because our expectations are increasing. You compare this campaign to last season's campaign, Quinny, and it's like we're going over there to Zagreb. There's an expectancy level that really has ramped up. But like Patrick says, I feel a little bit disappointed, but I felt the same after the Bruges game. I felt that was an opportunity that we could have taken 3 points from as well. But again, the disappointment isn't a negative. It's just that we are making strides at this level.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said for progress. I think both the games like last night and Bruges were both quite, kind of sterile in a way, like opportunities missed, like you say. I think the draw just puts us back on par for the course. When I did my kind of predictions when the fixture list came out, I had us drawn, and cross my fingers, but I had us drawn at home to Leipzig and winning away to Zagreb. And we've got a few games and results this season that if you were to swap them around, I think we're basically on par. So it's a bit of it's a very thin silver lining coming out of the game is just like, we're just maintaining where we should be, or where the kind of expectations would have been at this point ultimately. But when you see Bruges, the way that, the quality of their defenders, even just the goalkeeper, and then like I was saying this in my review of the game last night, but if you look at the Rosowski, the right back, I thought was like quite a good player. I think he did a good job for his team going forward and going back. But see the rest of that defence and the goalkeeper, like how many of them would get a game for Hearts or Aberdeen? Not many, So like we really didn't test them enough, and that's why it is opportunity miss, because it's not like we got lots of chances and the keeper played a blinder or the defenders were amazing. They got off the hook, kind of is the way it felt from like how us attacking in that way,
We were in amongst quite a few Celtic fans last night watching the game, and that was the kind of sense. I heard a few people saying that this feels like a domestic game where we're playing at home almost. We had the bulky possession, like we were the home team dominating it. And they didn't have a massive amount of quality. One player I would say, though, going back to Patrick's point on Kuhn, that I felt did really well was their converted right back who was playing left back, Pierre. What's his name? Gabriel. But Gabriel, I thought, in terms of a player standing out for them, he was the guy. But what that tells me, Chris, is that in domestic football, normally if you've identified a threat, you're going to have to be a damn good player and a fine player to nullify it. In Europe, they've identified the threat of Kuhn, and they really have tried to man-mark him at the game. And the guy did really well. I mean, Kuhn got free a few times, got a few balls over, but he needs to find a way of combating that. I always remember it, in the early days, and I'm not calling him Messi-esque, but in the early days of Messi, one of his managers spoke about the fact that he's always going to be nullified. Teams are always going to do that, and you need to find a way around it. And Kuhn's at that stage at the moment where he needs to find a way around that as well.
Yeah, I remember years ago, one of I think it might have even been, the old famous Scottish commentator, name escapes me, Archie Macpherson. It was, I remember when...
How did you forget about Archie?
All I could think was a woof, I remember that old saying, that was the old Archie
yes,
Macpherson.
a stramash.
A stramash, absolutely. But I remember him speaking about Henrik Larsson when Henrik was going through his goal-scoring prime. And he said it was incredible because he must have been the most marked man in Scottish football, and yet he found the space. He found ways to create spaces and create opportunities. And for me, that's what a player like Kuhn has to look to do. You start to get recognition through your performances. Kuhn has been excellent so far this season, largely. But the downside or the challenge that presents itself with that is that players are going to identify you, as you say, as one of the danger men. And we've seen it with various players. Kyogo gets special treatment in certain games. Maeda, he's a difficult player to try and address. But again, I think actually Zagreb did a good job on him as well last night. So it is something that players, as you progress your game, as you establish yourself as one of the key players within a team, you're going to bring on that kind of unwanted attention from opposition players, and you have to find a way to address that, to maybe do things that aren't easy to scout or aren't easy to identify. Change it up a little bit. If you're getting too, known for cutting inside and lobbing a ball in, well, actually mix it up. Go to the byline and try throwing more of a traditional cross. Very easy for someone like me to say, not so easy to do. It takes a lot of work in the training ground, and the player has to be prepared to adapt. And I think, Kuhn is the type of player that could certainly do that. It looks to me like he's got the attributes to do that. But I thought, going back to last night's game, we had similar comments last night. Some people saying it was a missed opportunity. Some people saying, well, actually, we should be grateful for a point. My view is that I think we have to assess it retrospectively after the Young Boys game. If we get through the Young Boys game with a win, I think we'll look back on this game and say, do you know what? We may have played it too safe, too passive, but it was a good point earned. However, in the unthinkable scenario where we don't win against Young Boys, I think we will view this game as a missed opportunity, because while I think they were very disciplined defensively and they did nullify some of our key players, I think we should have shown more urgency. We should have shown more impetus, and I think there was an opportunity there to take advantage of a team that was under strength by their standards for me. But as I say, it's sometimes you're only as good as your last game. We go to the cup final and then we go and play Young Boys. We get 2 good results there. Nobody will even remember this game.
No, this is a big thing, and I know that we will have to see the full the full landscape of the campaign before we can, point to a particular match and say points dropped, etc. But we're in a great position, Patrick. You're looking at that league table at the moment, and all the cliches. I'm going to drop them all today at some point. After 6 games, 9 points, bite your hand off, all that kind of stuff. But it's still within our hands. We can be the architects of our own success in this group. We're going to young boys. You're looking at the worst team in the group. They're down there with Leipzig and Bratislava, the other 2 teams that we beat. And you think to yourself, well, let's make it a treble and let's get that win. I shared a little graphic that I pulled out of the depths of Twitter this morning, shared it with the group in relation to how the kind of points have changed. At the very beginning of the campaign, Patrick, people were saying that you needed 9 or 10, etc. So that's kind of been looked at. And I'm going to give full credit to Football Rankings on X, who reckon, right, so say Celtic win their next game, right, takes us up to 12 points. They reckon you secure a top 24 place and a knockout if you get 12 points. 100% they're saying. If you get 11, 99%. If you get 10, 83. If we don't win the next 2 games and don't get a point, then the chances of us qualifying now are 38%. So it does turn into a must-win game, Patrick. But to be honest with you, I'm okay with that at Celtic Park against this level of opposition.
Yeah, you're right. And I think we should win. I mean, we're all saying how poor Zagreb looked last night, apart from maybe their defensive game. But I mean, young boys, as Chris I think mentioned maybe before the show, I think they're about 9th in the Swiss League, or dead bottom of the Champions League. It's a competition between them and Bratislava to see who's going to be the worst team in the competition. And I suppose you can sort of consider ourselves lucky with the draw. That we've ended up playing the 3 worst teams in the competition: Young Boys, Bratislava, and Leipzig. And hopefully we're going to get home wins against all 3 of them, and that will see us through. You're saying there about sort of odds and probability. I very quickly pulled up the betting markets. Celtic are 1 to 20 to qualify in the 9 to 24 league phase, which is the only way we can qualify now. I don't think we can finish in the top 8, or it's very statistically unlikely. So I fancy those odds. Obviously, they fancy us to pick up at least a point at home to Young Boys, which I think we all would as well. So I think Chris is right. I think retrospectively you have to look at it. Well, the aim was to get 9 or 10 points and qualify. First year of the new format, we've got a really good draw. So just try and get to that next stage in the first time of asking. And I like to think we're still going to do that. But it comes in a run of games, and sort of jumping ahead to the weekend. You have a very strange performance against Bruges. You have a sensational first half against Ross County, and then the weather sort of affects things up at Pittodrie, and it's a bit of a scrappy game.
Mm-hmm.
And then we let Hibs in quite a few times, so it's a run of games that, depending on how the next game goes, it can be viewed in very different ways. So retrospectively, I think after Young Boys, this will be viewed as a very good result. But I think after the weekend, I think we need to win at the weekend, or else this could quickly turn into, all of a sudden, we've had 5 or 6 poor performances in the space of 3 weeks. So, it is December. There's a lot of games. There's a lot of football to be played, and I think we will win on Sunday. But how we look back at this on Monday or in a month or 2, it could all be very different. But I think ultimately, I'll go for the positive view. I think it will be looked back on as a point gained.
Yeah, it's fair play. And again, when we're looking at progress, Quinny, and I'm constantly comparing, I always look back to say, right, you need to improve on that. I do that in every aspect in my day-to-day existence, and I certainly do it with Celtic. Are we making progress? Absolutely, when you consider how we were performing last season. Now, last season, when we were talking about the European games, I always went back to the point that there were margins, there were moments, and we didn't quite get there. And there's a lot of people coming into the comments to say last season we'd have lost that game last season because there's a different kind of metal. And I think I agree with that. I think there's a maturity, but I think a big part of that is down to the personnel, Quinny, because we are playing a completely different, well, not completely different side, but we're playing a different side now to the one we were playing this time last year, aren't we?
I kind of find it hard to talk. I think if you played that team last season, and it would probably be quite a similar match. But I think what the difference would be is I don't think Joe Hart saves that tip off the bar that Schmeichel gets. So yeah, that's probably right. That last season we probably would have lost that game, but I don't totally subscribe to that, because like in the old format, especially, like there was always a team that was home and away. Can we take 6 points from them? It's always the thought. It's always the expectation. Obviously, it never actually really happened. But again, I think that's kind of, I don't know. I kind of felt that way about the Bruges game a little bit, because they've got a wee bit more about them, and at home as well, it was a wee bit on the knife edge, as it were. But we had all the possession. We just like literally like, it wasn't until the subs came on. When McKeown first came on, you seen a really good breakaway for McKeown's shot where it was McGregor driving through the middle. That never happened the whole game until that point. And then, like somebody mentioned earlier, with Engels kind of breaking through for the cutback, that was like the ball going out to Forrest, and then Forrest Engels trying to cut back for Ida. It wasn't until the subs came on that we started actually trying to like knit some play together and actually just try and open a team up, you know. So I think like the players, like Matt O'Reilly, put him in from last season into that. Maybe we've got Hart and goals, maybe detracts a little bit. But I think if you put Matt O'Reilly up front with that team, I don't think. Yeah, I think it's. Yeah, I kind of get away from being disappointed about it. I'm sorry.
The big thing for me, you're mentioning Matt O'Reilly, and obviously him no longer.
Didn't want to.
Quinny, fast forward 3 years and we'll still be bemoaning the loss of Matthew. Here we go. We're going to get some of the comments coming in, and first one up is Paddy Lavery, because Paddy is going to give you, this is a compliment from Paddy, Chris. Double Denim done well on hosting duties last night for a wee change. Now, I don't know if he means you did well for a change, or you did well because it was a wee change. I'm not sure, right?
Yeah. What's the answer? Who's hacked Paddy's account? Come on, own up.
Well,
Paddy rarely says anything nice for me.
It could be Finley.
I did acknowledge us on the chat, and I appreciate Paddy's support. But I think the guys last night did a lot of the heavy lifting. Ryan and Sean did most of the heavy lifting. I just asked them questions and sat back and let them do the work.
Well, thank you to every single one of the Acsom contributors, and also the listeners, old and new, and hopefully a couple of other guys who don't listen, who will start listening, who came out last night, because it was a bitterly cold evening. There was a bit of traffic congestion on the way into the venue, and of course it was quite an early kick-off time as well. So thanks everybody. It was the first in a series of live matches we're going to be covering at Barra's Art Design. We're going to be covering the game on Sunday. They've already booked out 200 odd tables. No, seats, tables. I mean, that would be some capacity, 2,000. But seats, 200 plus seats have been booked out. They're free, but to guarantee a seat, get onto the BAD website and you'll be able to book it from there. The link is underneath this video, incidentally. Barry O'Sullivan, here we go. Would not want to watch last night's game ever again. I had to, Barry. I had to this morning, mate. However, one more away Champions League point and an extra 750k. Is that how it works? Do you get 750k for 1 point? That's sensational. I mean, when you consider what we're going to win, if in terms of prize money, if we win the League Cup on Sunday, right, and you compare that to a 1 point in the Champions League, that is the land of milk and honey, isn't it?
Night and day. It's absolutely night and day. Somebody did make that point last night. What do we get for a draw? And I wasn't able to answer it. So that's quite interesting. I'll need to verify if that's true. But if it is, it really puts into context where our priority should lie. And what gets me about that point is surely the board have that information and would look at that and would say, look, if we're going to invest or continually invest in a team, Europe has to be the target, because that's where you maximise your return on investment. Domestic dominance is great. As fans, we love it. You're getting as many trophies in the trophy cabinet is wonderful. But if you're going to progress as a team, this is where the investment or the return on investment lies. So surely to goodness that must inform our recruitment strategy.
See, when I look at I see it almost like the backbone of the side that came in the summer from Schmeichel. We spoke about this last night. Jackie McNamara pinpointed Schmeichel as the best signing, the free transfer that came in. Known to Brendan Rodgers. There was no worldwide search for Kasper Schmeichel. We just phoned him. He fancied coming up the road. Aye. And obviously we had Trusty, we had Engels and Ida. And I do think that with those four players, Chris, the view and the angle of getting that type of player in has been with a view to progressing in Europe. And now, people might laugh at that because not all of them have had a great season so far, right? A few of them are coming in for criticisms. Some might say unfairly. But I do think we've already changed tact when it comes to the type of player we're bringing in. The last part of this point would have taken 9 points by now at the start of the campaign. Hail, hail, and hail, hail to you as well, Barry. Big shout out to Andy Lee, who came along last night with his daughter. You will see him popping into the chat, and he came along to have a wee beer, a free pie, and some chat with Jackie McNamara. Now, there's loads to discuss here. And when we're talking about Kuhn and the defender that was obviously marking him, I'm going to bring in John McDonald, a.k.a. Carol Jungle Boy. Here we go. Double denim. This is one for you. I told you to get your double denim shin guards out the day. Eh? Last minute sub for John Hughes. There you go. In you come. The big man couldn't make it today. Pierre Gabriel. Do you have double denim shin guards? That's the first question. Are they Levi's or Wranglers?
I've got, all I'm going to say is I've got a lot of denim. I'm not telling you exactly where.
Quinny's laughing. What's your era, Quinny? Because I remember coming through with Pepe. Remember Pepe jeans as well? Aye.
Yeah.
That's before your time. That's before your time, Quinny.
I remember Pepe jeans.
You got a free keyring. If you bought a pair of Pepe jeans, you got a free keyring. And they became collectible. You know that. You're smelling because you've got a jacket and everything. Right, here we go. Right, John McDonald. Pierre Gabriel had a real don't give up attitude, got back to front really well, made a couple of sledgehammer tackles on Kuhn. There's the genesis of a fantastic all-round defender there. Now, by the way, I've got to admit, Quinn, I'm going to come to you. I know you've got a good knowledge of football across the board. I had never heard of this player. So I was having a wee look at him this morning. I know that he's played a wee bit of football in La Liga. He's played in Ligue 1. And now, obviously, he's playing in Croatian football. Not the first choice left back, but he's 26-year-old French. He's never got a full international cap, came through the underaged. He was a very good player, but you know what? He might have just had a good night last night.
Yeah, I think he definitely was active in the game. You know, everyone's kind of giving him rave reviews. I didn't, doesn't, other than a few of the things where he's charged forward and made some of those tackles on Kunissi, I didn't really pay him much mind myself. But he's normally the right back. I think that's part of the thing. You know, they've actually got a pretty nice left back that we probably should be looking at called Perkovic. He's been out injured. He's a bit of a Croatian, Zagreb guy. You can probably fill in the blank, of his, what he's kind of doing and all the rest of what people say about him. So yeah, I actually thought Rostovsky was pretty good. I think like what that shows you about with the Pierre Gabriel guy, like you say, he's got a wee bit of track record of playing at a higher level. So he's got experience and kind of don't want to say pedigree. It's probably a bit of a stretch word for this case, but like he's used to playing a team like Celtic and being like under pressure, having to make those sorts of tackles against like upper class players and really putting everything out there. And that's kind of like some of the upgrade stuff that we've had in this window, even for maybe some of the elite experience that Trusty and Ida kind of lack on paper when we sign them. They have played against like some of the best teams in the world already a couple of times, if not more, so it's not a big stretch to play Zagrebs and Bruges all of a sudden when they've played against Chelsea's and whatever. So it's definitely like it's a big, when people talk about the physical side of football, a lot of people either just think about pace or they just think about like actual strength, but a big part of the physicality is like the whole movement of the match, being able to do those yards the whole game like that guy did, at the end of the game he's still breaking through and stuff. And obviously Dyson kind of exemplifies that as well as a few others, but a lot of guys that come from the top end have like just higher benchmarks on like their physical stuff, and that can show through in tight matches.
Yeah, there was a sense going back to Kuhn, by the way. What I will say about him is he didn't hide. So he was obviously up against a really tough challenge last night, but he did not at any point hide. He kept trying to make something happen. So good for the kind of character there. But when you're looking at that game, Patrick, did you consider that it looked like a team who had been beaten 7-1 for Dortmund and were quite scared to open up against a team who had been hammered by Bayern Munich, who similarly were a wee bit scared and a wee bit timid, and they didn't really want to make that move. It did look a wee bit like that, a chess game a wee bit,
It did, actually. I hadn't even considered that fact, but it did. And especially when you consider going into last night, we were on 8 points, they were on 7. A point, kind of suited both teams, considering, our supposed level compared to where we're actually sitting at the table. I don't know their remaining 2 fixtures, but, they were obviously happy to go with a point. It's not as if they went full gun, all guns blazing last night either. So maybe there is a bit of trauma, a bit of PTSD from sort of recent matches in this campaign. I think I keep on repeating it, but I think we will look back on it as a point gained, as I say. And going into the young boys game, I'm fully confident we'll get the 3 points there. I think what's interesting going forward, I'm saying about all these games in December, the poor weather, the travel, big game after big game, going from a European away day to a League Cup final against your biggest rivals. Such big occasions, and we don't have a winter break this year. And it's the first time because of the Champions League format, which it'll be interesting to see how we manage that, both throughout the start of January, where we would normally be in, say, Dubai or Tenerife or something, not partying but training, and how we manage it sort of into January and February, whether we look maybe a bit tired. I think that'll be quite interesting to see. Because obviously we do have those 2 more games in the new format, and then we'll have another 2 games. Fingers crossed when we get to the playoff round in the middle of February. So it'll be interesting to see how the players deal with that. But I think we do have a decent size of squad. I know Brendan likes a smaller squad, and we probably could have get rid of a few more players. But especially when you look at the substitutions last night, a lot of the times he might change the system and the tactics in a game, but usually the personnel changes are like for like. And he brings on the same subs, Ida for Kyogo, Forrest will come on for one of the 2 wingers. We've obviously got a good few options in the midfield. Obviously, defence and goalkeeper, that's sort of an emergency situation if you're changing that. But, we've got a decent few options to rotate. Guys like Scales and McCowan, they'll come in during some league games. But I think fitness-wise, I'm not sure that was the issue last night. I think maybe you're right. We're sort of maybe a bit sort of scared to come out a wee bit in case we threw it away, like disasters in the past. But I think going forward, I wonder if tiredness could creep into the side over January and February.
Hopefully there'll be a bit of a refresh in the January. We're obviously looking ahead to young boys. And let us know in the comment section if you were at any of the games the last time we faced them 31 years ago. This shows you how far we've come on, Quinny. Here we go. Celtic Da segment of the show coming up. Here we are. It's the... Chris is laughing because he'll remember it as well as I do. It's the 29th of September 1993, and Celtic have drawn nothing each with young boys of Bern, as they were then called, in the UEFA Cup first round. We take them back to Celtic Park, and it's nothing each again. We couldn't buy a goal. Goes to extra time, and we rely on an OG to get us through. The Celtic team that night, listen to this. This is a phenomenal side. Takes me back. Pat Bonner in goals. We had, listen to this team. Seriously, it's full of superstars, guys. Gary Gillespie, Tom Boyd, Peter Grant, Mark McNally, Mike Galloway, Pat McGinley, Paul McStay, Andy Payton, Jerry Craney, and Brian O'Neill. The substitutes, Charlie Nicholas, version 2, Gordon Marshall, Frank McAvenny, version 2, Darius Dovchik, and Barry Smith. The goal was scored by Bowman, an OG in the 104th minute, in front of 21,500 at Celtic Park. It was remembered for the demise of Tiger Tim, who was sacked after making an announcement on the radio that night, right, on the PA that night. So we have come quite far, 31 years ago. That's a wee bit of a stretch for you. You are a young boy. You can't remember that, can you?
No, I'd have been 5, so no, I've got no memory of that one. I was a young boy. That's where I was.
What I love, though, is I love the tales of the old-time Celts who were at games like that, who went to Switzerland to watch us getting humped by Neuchâtel Xamax. And, of course, last night we were represented, Acsom were represented at the game by Kevin McCluskey. Was Declan at the game, Patrick? Was he also there?
He was not, no. I think Dortmund was enough, and I think he's heading down to Birmingham next month, but he wasn't there last night, no.
No. And
slacking,
Kevin,
isn't he? Slacking.
Yes, slacking, part-timer, absolutely. Only 2 away days in a season. Joe Hamilton, here we go. I can't shake the feeling of disappointment, but a point away in the Champions League would have been a dream in the past. Now, there was a wee bit of chat there about refresh in January, having players actually available when you re-register your squad. Quinny, I'm going to come to you. I'm just throwing you under the bus, mate. If you don't know the answer, just let me know. When do we re-register the squad? Is it after or before the playoff?
Yeah, I've got no idea. I suppose they must open it up for it. Or, well, Yeah, I don't know, 'cause it's halfway. It's not even at the end of January, is it? The first game, it's like the 20th or something. If memory serves me, I'll go and check the fixtures, but I don't know. Sorry.
I'm just looking at the kind of refresh last night and watching the game again today. What happens again, as I've mentioned, you remove that wee bit of emotional element. You're thinking, what does the game need? And at 65, 70 minutes, that's when we expect, Chris, the introduction of new faces. And you're thinking to yourself, right, you're looking for the game changer here to come on and do something a wee bit special. Almost happened. We spoke about the Ida. I say half chance because it was a brilliant bit of defensive play, and he didn't get onto the end. He would have done. He'd have slotted that away. Good bit of movement by Engels. But there's a couple of wee other bits of the park that I'm looking at, and I'm thinking, listen, Tony Ralston is my favourite player. I know he's not the best player, right? And last night I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking to myself, there's a massive drop down, isn't there, when AJ goes off? There is. There's a massive drop down in quality. There's a moment, intricate bit of passing. Engels starts it off right down the right-hand side. All you need is a quality ball in. Kyogo's got a bit of space, and it's wild. So we do have areas, Chris, right? If we really want to be, laser focused on improving, there are areas of this team that we can improve on. That's one of them for me.
Yeah, I think throughout this season there's been players who have elevated their game. AJ is one of them. For me, I think after his international exploits, he's taken his game to another level this season. I think he's been superb. He's adding goals to his game. He's still doing, his defensive work. He's contributing to the attack. Good link up with Kuhn and Engels. At times, continued since we had O'Reilly there. So definitely players who I think are elevating their game this season and really fitting into the system. There are other players who I think are starting to stagnate a little bit in terms of their development, and I think Tony Ralston and possibly Greg Taylor may have reached their level within this system at the moment. Now, I don't mean they've reached their level as players. I think that would be unfair to say. But I think within this system and within the style of football that we play, I don't know if there's more to come for either of these players. For me, they look as though they've maybe plateaued. And what we're getting week on week from these players, albeit more from Greg Taylor because Ralston's very sporadic, but I don't see Greg elevating his game or further developing his game in our team at the moment. And look, that's not me coming down on Greg Taylor as a person or as a player. Huge part of the success, really played brilliantly under Ange, can definitely contribute in different elements of our play. I mean, the assist for Hatate most recently, brilliant. The some of his forward passing, we know he's got a history of playing in midfield, and you can see elements of that. But defensively, teams recognise there's a vulnerability there, and they try and exploit it. And time again, we pinpoint examples of where Greg Taylor, by virtue of trying to show what he can do in attack and contributing to the attack, is leaving our defence exposed. Right, and look, that's not a personal attack. It's just that people in the comments have seen it. We've spoken about it time after time. There's so much evidence in favour of that, and it kills me because I really like Greg Taylor as a player. I would love if Greg Taylor could take his game to the next level. I just don't know if there's, willingness on his part to do it at the moment, particularly with the contract situation. So it's a bit frustrating. With Ralston reminds me of an old-fashioned style of player. He's one of these guys who gives you 100%. It took a little bit of time to get up to the speed on the match last night. I think he gave away possession a couple of times pretty early, but defensively he wasn't too bad. But you've got that element of great opportunity to go and get a goal, put a cross in, and God knows what he was trying to aim for, but I don't even know if the ball's landed yet. He wasn't the only one guilty of that last night. I'll point that out, but if you're bringing players off the bench to make a difference against what was a really tired Zagreb team at that point, you're like, come on, this is an opportunity to go and exploit their fatigue and do something. And I don't feel that Ralston, or to be fair, any of the other substitutes really took advantage of that. And if you can't take advantage of that in the Champions League game, when are you going to take advantage of it? I mean, you're up against a team that are dead on their feet. Manager doesn't have a lot of options off the bench. Run at them. I mean, be old-fashioned. Run at them. Make them run. Do the old Alex Ferguson thing where he spoke about Ryan Giggs going on and just said, there, whatever it was, the right-back's tiring. Go and run at them. Mm-hmm. You should have done that last night.
I think there's an issue with the backup wingers in respect to that. Sorry, Quinny, did you dig out some info on the transfer situation?
Yeah, so the final game of the group stage is the 29th of January. And then the rule is you can register ahead of the knockout phase. You can register a maximum of 3 new players by the 6th of February. So there's like a little registration window that opens up at the end of January, essentially. But for the group stage, the squad is current. It won't change now. It's for the next bit.
That's really interesting, right? So we've touched on the value of a point in the Champions League, for example. Patrick, we talk about also showing ambition. I've been saying it all season in relation to Aberdeen pushing for second. There comes a moment in January where their board needs to show a bit of ambition if they want to really push seriously for second position, refresh the squad. We're in a similar situation, but on a different kind of scale. What do we do in January? Do we look at that and think, you know what, we could go out there and buy 3 players who could actually make a difference to our starting 11 going into the playoff? Or again, are we just participating? Listen, whatever we achieve, Patrick, we want more, right? So I'm not going to be an entitled fan and all that kind of stuff. But come January, that could be a huge window for us. Could be.
It could. And I think, Quinny said the last game's the 29th. I want to say that was the day after. So we'll know our opponent with something like 36 hours of the window to go in that playoff round. So that'll be quite interesting.
You're already visualising how we're going to do our business here, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be transfer deadline day madness. All right.
The classic law, leave yourself 3 days at the end to know if you get Champions League money coming in or not.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't really fancy us to do a lot of business in January. You're right. I mean, financially, we certainly have the wiggle room to sign 3 or 4 absolute quality players. Last night for me, I thought the 2. I mean, no one had a bad game, but no one really had a good game either. But I thought the 2 standout players for me, Hatate and Taylor, I thought were really poor last night. Hatate, I know he's out there to make ambitious passes and try and thread the needle, but he lost the ball so many times, and a lot of it was just absolutely careless. And everyone was careless. Maeda didn't have his best game either, but I thought those 2 players in particular, they had a bit of a shocker, if I'm being honest. That's just my opinion. Going into January, the 2 positions I thought, maybe the only 2 problems I had coming out of the summer window was left back and maybe another winger. And I'm not even sure what side I'm talking about here, because obviously Yang and Forrest seem to sort of interchange. I think Palmer's gone. I think he's done. And you've got Maeda on the left and Kuhn on the right. So I'd like to see a really good quality winger come in. And then, a bit like what Chris was saying, we've seen what Taylor can do, but we've never actually seen it in Europe, in my opinion. You struggle to think of a game where, we've had a European night, we've won, we've got a good result, and Taylor's been one of the standout players. He's always one of the ones that struggle at that level. So those are the 2 positions I'd like to see filled. Depending on the draw, I think if we get a team like Benfica, for example, I would fancy us at home to do the business and hopefully hold on away. If we get a team like, say, Atletico Madrid or Real Madrid, which I think is a possibility, I'm not sure what difference 1 or 2 signings makes. So, depending on the team, obviously you've got a better chance against teams like Benfica if you go out and do that business. But, I'm going to use the cliche, it's difficult to do your business in January. If we're looking to add a real quality player, we're probably looking at taking it from a team.
Did you just get a text there for Peter Lowell? Did you, honestly, mate? Because that is right out the Facebook.
Along with a couple of £100 in a brown envelope as well,
Sorry, Peter, if you're listening. Obviously, we're going to get a strike in the next 24 hours, aren't we? We are going to get a strike. My Wi-Fi is going to start dropping in just a moment or two. Watch this.
Banned from the press conferences. No, I mean, as a cliche, but I think it's probably true. Obviously, I've never been through any sort of transfer negotiations in January, but obviously teams will be at a critical point in the season and will be sort of hesitant to let players go, and we don't want to overpay too much. So, I'm relatively happy to wait till the summer, unless there's some sort of injury crisis between now and then. But I think it's an exciting time, looking ahead to the draw. Hopefully it is a team like Benfica. I mean, there's games tonight and there's still 2 more match days, so it's incredibly hard to predict what type of team we're going to get. I think Real Madrid and Benfica are sort of up there as definitely finishing in that sort of region, so there'll be 2 of the many teams we could get. But you were saying about progress earlier. I had a wee think, even though it was an away game, if you go back to last season, we were only a few seconds away from being unbeaten at home. That Lazio goal, I mean, we could have won that game. I still think we could have won that game.
Yeah.
But even if it was a draw, we'd have went unbeaten at home last season. So I went back a bit further. Now you get Leverkusen 4-0 against Ange. We were so early in Ange's spell when that game came around, and it's obviously not good enough to lose 4-0 at home, but it was early on. The next loss is Real Madrid, the first Champions League game. Current champions, biggest club in the world, great team, understandable. Leipzig in that same season, that was a bit disappointing. That was late on, and then Lazio, obviously, what I just mentioned there, that was last few minutes disappointing. But I mean, we've built up a fairly decent record at home in Europe in the last 4 seasons, and I like to think that's going to continue with the young boys game. So all credit to Ange, Brendan, John Kennedy, recruitment, everyone at the club, because I think it's what we've all been crying out for, and it's what we probably lacked in the sort of 9-in-a-row period that we had in the last decade. We were quite toothless in Europe, but we've really upped our game the last 4 seasons, and it's a massive credit to how the club's been run the last 3.5, 4 years.
That was a big thing. You weren't seeing progress, weren't you? That was a problem during that period you mentioned. But now it appears that we are getting that kind of progress. And people might be thinking, Quinny, we're jumping ahead of ourselves here, talking about January transfers with one eye on Europe and all that. But you're allowed to dream, because we have got ourselves into a good position. And I said this morning, why not be bold and say, I'm confident of beating young boys at home? They're sitting rock bottom of the league without a point. And as Patrick says, we have built up a bit of a head of steam at home. There's nothing wrong as a football fan by saying, you know what, I fancy our chances in that game. And then you're looking ahead, because if you don't look ahead, right now, Brendan Rodgers should know in January what he wants to do. He needs to know at this stage, the negotiations in terms of talking to agents at this stage, it's not tapping up as such. Talking to agents, seeing who's available, what it would take to get a certain player to the football club. Going back to the conversation we had with John Collins last week, having a short list of 4 or 5 players and thinking to yourself, where are we pitching this? Are we pitching this at our first choice, or are we going to have to pitch this at our third choice? So I don't think there's anything wrong, Quinny, with talking about things like transfer targets midway through December.
I also had the pleasure of being there for that John Collins thing, and I did think on that kind of point, like when you hear this happen with transfers all the time, where the player will come out and they'll say, "Oh, the club have wanted me for ages. They've really made an effort, and I really felt it," or the manager has really wanted me for ages, and that's why I've now made the move and all the rest of it. And I think the thing that I'm always frustrated with is how late to the party we are with transfers. Like there's guys that, like, let's call a spade. We should have communications open with like tons of goalkeepers after the Joe Hart he's going to retire at the end of the season thing. So then, like next time when Schmeichel's kind of going, there might be that kind of thing come out where it's like, oh, the club have actually been after this guy for a while or whatever. So I get the whole list thing, and I think that's a kind of undervalued part of it when you're a fan, like thinking about how these things actually shake out and all the rest of it. But a little bit of the frustration and the vibe I get sometimes with Celtic is that we're just like, let's make the list today, like who will we speak to for the first time? And then they're like, oh, listen, this guy's already been having trials and he's already been, far down the road in negotiations somewhere else. And we're always just like, oh crap, we just missed out on that one, perhaps. But they've got to be looking ahead, because I was looking there. Young boys are currently 9th in the Swiss League, and the Swiss League does the sort of thing that we do where they split. They're in the Champions League at the moment, and they're in the bottom half of their table. So they're bottom of the Champions League. That's not changing anytime soon, So like they will just be looking to not get hammered, essentially, So that is a game where you can very easily say there's no excuse acceptable for not winning that. Really, that's the sort of situation it should be, failing some sort of crackhead referee that turns up or something, But that's the way it's sitting,
I'm just thinking of that referee. I'm visualising that referee. But Scotland don't have anybody refereeing in the Champions League, Quinny. That's all I'm going to say. Jay Conley, Jay Larkin. Although some will point to the fact that we could have been a wee bit more composed in the final third, another away clean sheet shows we're maturing as a team. Expected a draw, so can't complain. A massive part of that as well, Chris, is we are then going to jump into a knockout 2-legged affair in the playoff, right? So that maturity that is mentioned here, I think we are galvanising ourselves for an away performance that might well be, like Patrick says, where your back's to the wall and you're maybe just trying to hold on. So when you're looking at the game last night, I'm going to drag that positive out of it, particularly the game against Atalanta. Who knows what's going to happen against Villa? But I do think we're maturing in that respect, and it should hold us in good stead for the knockout phase.
100%. I think what we've done this season is we've got a much more stable back line. Okay, I know we've spoken about the left back position, etc., but we've got a world-class goalkeeper, and I'm not going to change my opinion on that. I think Kasper Schmeichel.
I like how he wears a polo under his top. I love that.
Yeah,
remember Benzo used to wear the short sleeves, Quinny?
Benzo.
Yeah.
No.
We're calling him Benzo.
Forget Benzo. I just like Casper.
I was never a fan of a goalie wearing tracky bottoms, but that was a 1980s thing. Remember Billy Thompson always wore tracky Bs, and then it was just not a good look. Weighed you down.
That's cheating. These guys are supposed to be tough. Come on. But did you see actually Kasper with his dad?
Yeah, I've seen that this morning.
That was brilliant. I mean, what a moment! Probably a great moment for him as well. But I tell you, I'd sign them both. Keep Kasper and St. Peter as backup. He looks as though he could still play. But I think going back to your point, we've got 3 really good centre backs for me that can do a job in Europe, and they've all proven it. And Carter Vickers, Trusty, and Scales. And let's not forget, Scales actually was man of the match in one of the games, at least one of the games in Europe recently, which is excellent. And we are a team that seems to do better when we're kind of unfancied and under pressure. We seem to rise to it a little bit. I sometimes think we crumble a touch when we're actually favourites, so there's big expectations on us. When we're kind of not really given a prayer, we tend to rise to the occasion a little bit. But what some of the games have proven this season, as you've said, the Atalanta game, the game last night, is that when we need to be, we can be disciplined. And for the bulk of the match last night, apart from a few iffy moments, we were pretty disciplined defensively. I appreciate we weren't under a huge amount of pressure by Zagreb, and I can only think of the one really clear-cut chance that Kasper puts over the bar. But we looked comfortable, we looked disciplined, we were doing the fundamentals quite well. There wasn't too much sloppiness or slackness from the back line, which was great to see. And I think when we've got our full team, I reckon we can hold the best teams, and as long as we keep that discipline and that kind of mental resilience as we play. It's just about how do we convert that discipline into something that feeds the attack. And I think that's where we're maybe lacking at the moment. We don't seem to have the out ball coming from defence into midfield and then into attack. I mean, I think Patrick pointed it out about Hatate last night. There was one moment I mentioned on the post match where at one point Hatate's got 3 options in front of him. He's got Maeda on his left, he's got Kyogo through the right, and he's got through the middle rather, and he's got Kun on the right. And he doesn't pick out any of the 3 of them. And it was such a wasted opportunity. And within a 5 or 10 minute spell after that, the amount of times that he gave away possession in offensive areas was really, really frustrating. And look, I've been one of Hatate's biggest defenders. I think when he's on his game, he's a fantastic player. He's like an old-fashioned number 10. He can pull that magic out his hat and open a team up with his passing. But there's a trade-off, and the trade-off against the top teams in Europe will generally get you punished. So we've got this defensive discipline, fantastic. But what we can't do is continually put our defence under pressure by failing to take advantage of that defensive discipline transitioning into attack. And because it's at that attacking phase where it's breaking down too often and we're basically inviting the teams back onto us. And that's my amateur coaching done. But we have to be disciplined all across the park, not just at the back, but middle and up front as well. There's no point in us having a player with Kyogo where he is absolutely running his heart out and he's getting no service whatsoever.
He's finding the space. That's a frustration. You've seen him at the moment that Ralston, when Ralston wildly crossed. And by the way, I think Ralston's a very good crosser of the ball. That was
normally, yeah.
But Kyogo's trying to get into that space, Chris, and he cuts an isolated, frustrated figure at times, doesn't he?
He does, and it's frustrating to watch. And actually, you see it more on second watch sometimes. If you just focus on him, his movement, he drifts away, he drifts into spaces. Now, he's got a really cheery demeanour. I think if he didn't have that, he'd be tearing his hair out at some of the lack of service that he's getting. And look, don't get me wrong, he's not necessarily, he's not free of any of the blame last night. Sometimes if you're not finding yourself in a game, you have to find ways to inject yourself into the game. You have to, look for those opportunities to influence. And I don't find sometimes that Kyogo always does that. As much as I love the player, I don't think he necessarily always reads the game well enough and adapts his game enough during the match. But we've got to find ways to utilise that incredible ability he's got to find space, to be an instinctive striker. And I think his lower numbers this year aren't down to him playing badly necessarily. I think it's down to the fact that we still cannot seem to find him during matches.
I know, and the one player that I look at in the midfield who often is that guy that can, play the ball through the eye of a needle is Hatate. I thought he was poor last night. He wasn't tidy enough, didn't protect the ball enough, gave away possession slackly, but so did Taylor. And I want to talk about that situation because Bobby has come in 1962. Has Greg Taylor been offered a new contract? Do you reckon he has been told there is someone coming, possibly Kay Tierney, and he isn't going to sign? Right, it's an issue, the left-back situation, and all I can do is share the information that we have managed to obtain by speaking to various different people within the game. Kieran Tierney was Brendan Rodgers' main target when Brendan first came in the door. He then, obviously, we couldn't do a deal, and he got injured on Scotland duty, and that didn't happen. Right, so Tierney, at the beginning of this season, I'm talking about, was top of his wish list. So that knocked that right down the road. Greg Taylor is looking to, rightly or wrongly, I would say rightly, from an individual perspective, looking to become one of Celtic's highly paid players in that top category of earners. And he wants to be in that category. He thinks he deserves to be in that category after 6 seasons at the football club. Brendan Rodgers wants to keep him, but I doubt very much that Celtic are going to offer him what he is looking for. And now that creates an issue, Patrick, right? Because we could argue all day about whether or not Taylor is suited to the system that Brendan Rodgers played. He certainly was suited to Ange Postecoglou's system. We could argue all day as to whether or not he is Champions League standard. But let's put that to the side for a moment and look at a situation where Celtic are not willing to offer him the deal that he's looking for, and he's got every right to look for it. He's a young guy with a young family on its way, etc., etc. And he's a guy that leaves in January. Now, that does create a situation for Celtic because we've got buy-in for a 1-year loan deal from Barcelona. I think he's a player who is in development. He's nowhere near the finished article yet. I like the fact that he's more forward-thinking in terms of his passing. His distribution seems to go forward more than Taylor. A lot of his passes went backwards last night. But it leaves us with him, Adam Montgomery, who hasn't kicked the ball for the Celtic first team for a long time, and the returning Alexandro Bernabé, the best left-back in Brazilian football. So that then becomes an absolute priority. And that is in the post come January.
Yes, and funnily enough, ever since Kieran Tierney left, it's been a bit of a problem position. We've either not had a good enough first choice or we've not a good enough backup for Greg Taylor. And, so many times we thought we'd got it right. We thought, Taylor and Bolingoli, if we all remember him, could split the position. And then Montgomery came in, and then Bernabé came in, and we thought he's a decent enough backup.
Don't forget
decent enough backup.
Diego. Do not forget Diego Laxalt.
Oh, right. How could I forget Diego? He was world class for 2 games, and then he just frustrated like everyone else that season, in my opinion. God, how could I forget the dreads?
I know. Were they dreads, or were they more kind of pleats? I remember somebody done a Photoshop of him sitting by the pool in Dubai, and Shane Duffy was doing his pleats, man. Oh, the braids. We had to laugh at ourselves at that moment, didn't we?
Aye. If you don't laugh, you'll cry. And I bet there was a few of us crying that season at different points. But we take us to Bernabé. He's not good enough, and that's really sort of took us up to this summer, didn't it? Because Bernabé played as recently as the Kelly draw back in February, when he lost his man at the back post. And I'd agree with your assessment, Paul. I don't think Valley's the finished article. Depending on what Barcelona want as a fee, I'd be tempted to sign him. I wouldn't spend too much money on him, if I'm being honest. I don't think he's don't think he's like we've uncovered a gem or anything. You know, he's a positive young player, looks a decent enough player. Maybe there's stats to say otherwise. But interesting what you say about Greg Taylor. I think that was maybe people's first or second assumption that he's been there a long time. He's been a first team regular for so long. Does a lot of the media stuff, does a lot of the interviews, and sort of obviously charity stuff and all that as well. So he's a very vocal player in the dressing room as well. And he is probably quite right professionally to ask for that pay rise, get that recognition. But from a footballing point of view, from a Celtic point of view, is he at the level of Callum McGregor, Kyogo, Nicholas Kuhn, Carter Vickers, Kasper Schmeichel? Probably not. And you've seen that in European games. But then obviously, as you say, we've got this dilemma at left back. So when you think about this, and then what you say about Rodgers wanting Kieran Tierney, that does it makes me believe a wee bit more that maybe Tierney might be coming back in January. It seems to be sort of lining up in that direction. And you're maybe saying to yourself, well, if you give Greg Taylor a wage rise that maybe isn't merited based on footballing ability, how many guys do you have chapping your door for wage rises? But then also, how much money do you save by not going out and spending 5-6 million on another left back who every signing's a risk, if we're being honest. So financially, looking at sort of a squad assessment, a transfer assessment, it's a bit of a head scratcher. I think we can get better. I know I just said it's a risk, but I think we can go out and sign better. Whether that's Kieran Tierney, if we can keep him injury free, whether it's some other left back. Hopefully we are scouting left backs. It is a problem position. It's been a problem position for a number of years, and it's now that I'm actually saying it out loud and thinking about it, it's probably something we need to address in January, isn't it?
I know, and it's one of the positions that you're looking at thinking maybe not a priority at this moment in time, but it becomes that, doesn't it, because of Greg Taylor's situation. It reminds me a wee bit, Quinny, with the contract of Ryan Christie. Ryan Christie's trajectory went up, whereby his wage didn't, and then when it came round to that point where he was going to sign a new contract, he, similar to Greg Taylor, got to that point where he was in the last period of his contract. He left for a little less than he was valued at, I think. And Taylor's now in that position. And I get that footballers have to look after themselves, but I'm in agreement with Patrick on this one. I don't regard Greg Taylor as important to this side or as good as the group of players he mentioned. Carter Vickers, probably Engels is in there because he came in for big money. Callum McGregor, Jamesy Forrest will be up there in terms of going up, contract by contract. Kyogo signed a new deal. All the guys will be the highest earners. Is Greg Taylor up there? Do you look at it and think to yourself, how much is it going to cost to replace him? Why don't we just keep him?
Well, I think with Taylor, I've been one of his biggest fans over the last couple of years. I think he's really, every year he's got better and better, and he's got better in some really interesting ways because of the way he plays for us. He's actually quite an offensive player and helps us unlock the door in tight games. But I think he's shown this year, he's still got that ceiling on the most important matches for us in Europe, and if we are to give him that contract, we're then accepting that. Because we're not going to get another left back on that wage bracket into the squad, and I don't think Rodgers is going to operate like that. So I think that's probably where it breaks down. Kieran Tierney's on to start for Arsenal in the Champions League tonight, by the way, if anyone doesn't know. But for me, on the whole left back chat, ultimately, yeah, I'm always all roads lead to Robbo. It's always the way I think of it in terms of what we should be getting, the sort of who might be available, who said they would come to us anyway, and all this other kind of stuff. But I think it's similar to what I said about the goalkeeper thing. We should be speaking to we should have the phone number of every left back in world football by now. It's not a new problem. It's something that's the writing's been on the wall for a few years. And I always think with the Tierney when we sold him, kind of reminds me of Spurs selling Bale and then buying Eric Lamela and guys like this, and that's kind of the path we've went down. We got that big wad of money, and then it's into the bargain basement. Half a dozen left backs over 5 seasons. And, Taylor's worked out, I think, domestically, no two ways about it. But we're now at that point where we've not got the Tierney, we've not got the Bale, and we now very much need it.
Yeah, you're right. And by the way, there's going to be people tearing their hair out in the comments saying you're still talking about Kieran Tierney. But this does lead us from Greg Taylor to that discussion point. And as Quinny quite rightly says, if he stars for Arsenal in this competition, then does that knock him off the radar? Yes, it does. So, Saul Goodman, thank you for supporting the channel first and foremost. Can you see this team making it to the quarter final if we stayed? Are you doing that because he's Saul Goodman or because of his point?
Because they did the super chat in his name.
No, aye, absolutely. It's a double dunter. But the super chat does support a Celtic state of mind. If we stay dogged and have a wee bit of luck, yeah, a big bit of luck. I think that there's a big bit of luck in the draw. Some might say we had a bit of luck in this draw. I think we've equipped ourselves really, really well across the piece. Danielle says it would be such a typical thing. I'll try and see if I can find it. Here we go. Danielle F. Last night showed me that Bernardo has to start in midfield. I agree with you. On Sunday, alongside Kalmack and all other important games, he was our best player. Watching it back, Danielle, I agree with that 100%. Didn't really see it at the time because I was watching it in a different environment. But yeah, I agree with that. I thought he was excellent. Up of McKeown, Engels and Hatate, toss-up for the third spot. Yeah, absolutely agree with that as well. And of course, McKeown's cup tied at the weekend. So thank you very much for your comment. I really appreciate that. One last thing I want to throw in there. I'll start with you, Chris. Daniel Cummins scored again yesterday in Europe for the B team, the youth team. The guy's got a brilliant record. I know Quinny keeps an eye. You go to some of the games as well, Quinny, as well, in relation to that. And listen, I'm not a data analyst when it comes to football. I'm not a coach. I'm not a scout. I'm a too old-fashioned, Quinny, to say that, he's scoring goals. What else can he do? Get him on the bench in a league game. Let's test him out.
I think when it comes to strikers, that is the currency. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really matter a lot of attributes. We've seen that so often, especially in Scottish football, that if you could just score, like, there's a few examples in our club and a few funny ones throughout the league over the years, but scoring goal, it's the most important statistic in football. You know what I mean? So guys that do it, guys that know how to do it, it's that's an ideal situation. They can play a style of play. They can take their weak foot as well as their right foot, or they can do all this other stuff. But especially for kids, like, that's a raw thing that can be built upon, you would think, quite easily. So I don't know, all this chat of Johnny Kenny coming back for striker free, this guy not getting a contract offer, it feels like the writing's kind of firmly on the wall, because like his record in the wee European thing is like definitely something you would think would get you on the bench against Ross County. I know. And then there's that opportunity if you're whipping a team to bring him on and get him some game time and actually have a proper look at him and say, look, can he make that step up? There's loads of clubs interested in him. They're going to these games, they're watching him. That looked like a tatty field that he was playing on yesterday, by the way. And it hasn't yet been offered a contract. So let's see how that one develops. Thank you, every single one of you, for getting involved. We're making a big announcement on a Celtic State of Mind in terms of the next event that we're going to be involved in. I say next, the next one that we announce is going to be a wee bit different. Is anybody into a bit of the boxing? You into a bit of the boxing, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You like a bit of the boxing, right? Nice one. Well, have you you've not done much sparring, have you? Michael Conlon. Yeah, that's a face that's not done much sparring. That was a compliment, Chris. Michael Conlon is going to join. I've got a few of them. A Celtic State of Mind. We are going to be at Barras Art and Design. It's going to happen on the 28th of February, and the ticket link will be underneath this video and on all the socials within about 5 minutes of this stream ending. So Michael Conlon, big Celtic fan. Can you remember controversially is his walkout tune? What do you call that, guys? I'm not right, when it comes to the linguistics or the vernacular. I don't know what you call it. What is it? A ring tune?
It's a ring walk. Yeah, it's a ring walk tune.
Is that what they call it? Right? Celtic Symphony. Place went wild. Right. So he's coming. I don't know if we'll play that as he's walking on the stage. Maybe we should.
We should.
You go.
Yeah.
Take a note of that. So the links will be shared on the video and on the socials. Thanks everybody for getting involved once again. And again, tomorrow, 12:30, we'll be back because that's what we do on a Celtic State of Mind. Thank you.
Okay.